Hey guys, it's Alex, and today I'm here with a book review for I Wish You All the Best by Mason Deaver. This is a young adult contemporary novel about a young teenager named Ben. Ben is non-binary, and when they come out to their parents, they're kicked out of the house and left with no other choice but to call their sister from whom they are estranged. They haven't spoken to their sister in about 10 years, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly from the book, and they wind up going to live with their sister and her husband in their house in a different city. This requires that Ben change schools, change friends, become almost an entirely different person, and also go back in the closet because now they're afraid of coming out to anyone else after the trauma that coming out to their parents was. I gave this book 3 stars. I did quite enjoy a number of aspects about it, but overall it felt a little bit inexperienced to me and not the kind of writing style I enjoy. To start with some of the negatives before we get into the positives of what I did really like and why I would recommend this book. Negatives, the writing style was not to my taste at all. It was a very casual writing style. There were a lot of Ben's inner thoughts. I'm someone who likes my stories to feel as though they're writing narration. They're the narration of the story and they're not conversational. This book had a very conversational tone. It was very casual. And I don't want my books to sound like conversations. I want them to sound like books. It was just very, very casual. I do think part of the reason for that is because it is in first person present tense, which is something I complain about a lot on this channel. I feel like I'm usually not a big fan of first person present tense writing. I don't mind it in some books, but a lot of the time it does feel very stilted to me, which is why I didn't super love it in here. It was also very heavy on the dialogue, which again is not something I'm a fan of. I don't like when there's just dialogue after dialogue after dialogue, especially when a lot of the narration that intersperses the dialogue is just Ben's inner thoughts, so that we're hearing dialogue, we're hearing Ben thinking, and then we're hearing more dialogue. And it just turns into a lot of people's words and not a whole lot of outside narration, like description and things like that. And I am someone who's very heavy on description, so while I don't mind dialogue in stories, obviously it's quite necessary, but when a book is as heavy in dialogue as this was, I enjoy it significantly less. But again, those are two very preferential things. If you like heavy dialogue books, if you like casual writing styles, I think that those would both bother you way less than they bothered me in this book. And it is hard when you don't really enjoy the writing style, when you don't super like the way a book is written, to really enjoy it overall, because so much of what you experience in a book is from the writing style itself. Like, the characters can be great, the situations can be great, the relationships great, but when you don't like the writing style, it's like the transportation method is flawed. Like, the way my writing professor used to describe it is, if the email system isn't working, it doesn't matter how important the email is or how great the email is. If the email doesn't go through, then you don't really get it. And that was kind of how I felt about a lot of this book, was that it was just like the transportation didn't work for me. Like, I wasn't receiving it. Like, it was just kind of jumbled, so that all the characters, all the relationships, everything was just a little less enjoyable because I didn't like the writing style. But some of the positives, I really loved Ben's character. I thought Ben was a great main character. I thought they were really well developed. And I was invested in their life. I was rooting for them. I like to have a main character that I can really get behind, that I can care about. And Ben felt very, very real. If I can get invested in the life of the main character, if I can root for them, if I can care about them, specifically Ben in this book, but like any main character, if I care about them and am invested in their life, that's half the battle of a book. That's half the battle of the story, what the story is trying to do. I care about the main character, so obviously I care about all the other things that are happening in the plot. And I thought Ben was just a great main character to carry this book along. I also quite enjoyed the romantic relationship in this book. This book is a contemporary, but it has a lot of romance in it. When Ben goes to this new school, Ben meets a new boy who's very cute, very funny. They become friends, and then they quite like each other and it becomes a romance. But it was very slow burn romance. It was very cute. I don't remember the boy's name, but Ben and him were just, they were adorable together. It was a very well developed romantic relationship, and I was so on board for this entire book. And I like rooting for the romantic relationship. Sometimes I don't care about it, sometimes I'm irritated by it, and sometimes it's like a neutral thing, but it's so much fun to just care about the romance and to be rooting for these characters and like hating these characters at times because they should be together. They should be together so much. And it's like everyone knows they should be together, except for the two of them, and it's like, Ben, you are so dumb, this boy likes you. And the fact that it made me angry makes me so happy, because it was just anger in the way that, like, you two teenagers are so dumb, just get together. And it was so cute. Like, I really did enjoy the romance. If you're a fan of, like, really cute, really slow burn romance with two dumb characters who don't realize that they're meant to be together, even though it's so painfully obvious to literally everyone else in the world that they're meant to be together, I think that will carry you through most of this book, even with any other flaws this book might have, because that was fantastically done in my opinion. I think Mason Deaver does a really great job with romance just based off this one book, because there were a lot of flaws in this and things that I didn't particularly love, but I did love the romance. Getting into my last major negative, which is kind of my last main point on this book overall, is the other relationships. I already talked about the romance. The romance was great. The other relationships, not so much. I didn't really feel like any of the other relationships in this book were particularly well developed. One of the most obvious ones was Ben's art teacher. Ben has a very close relationship with their art teacher. Ben is an artist. Ben really loves art, and they're the only student in Art 4, which is kind of just like you've taken art every year of high school, you get put into Art 4, they're the only one there. The first time they meet, this art teacher, whose name I also don't remember, but she was quite lovely in the book, she gave Ben a key to the art room and was like, I can tell you're someone special. And it was like, okay, that's weird. Like, you've just met this person. Like, you don't know them at all. They're just some random teenager, and you're giving them a key to the art room. It was very strange to me that she just immediately did that to this kid that she didn't really know all that well, that she literally just met. It wasn't like this was a few weeks into class. This was their first meeting. She just said, I can tell you're someone special. Here's the key. And then as the book progressed, it was just a lot of little things like that. And when Ben was saying goodbye, because it's high school and you leave high school eventually for whatever reason, Ben was saying goodbye to her and she was crying. And it's like, why are you crying? Like, this relationship hasn't been developed. You two barely know each other. You've barely had any, like, page time together. The only thing she did was give Ben a key to the art room and pressure them into taking part in some art competition or art showcase, or I forget what it was. But that was it. It didn't feel like that relationship had any depth, especially not enough depth to make a teacher cry over it. It was just very strange to me. Like, and I felt that way with a lot of the relationships in the book. She was just the most obvious because at the end she was crying and I was like, I feel nothing at this because you two, like, don't have a relationship. There's nothing here that I care about or am invested in. I felt a little bit similarly with Ben and their sister and their sister's husband. Ben and their sister obviously had a relationship that they were dealing with, but it felt a lot more surface level than I wanted it to be. I didn't find myself particularly invested in it. I wanted to be very interested by it because estranged siblings relationships are something that fascinate me. I think that's very interesting to explore in books, but this felt very much like, okay, here are the problems they have. Let's lay them all out straight. They're in therapy together. And that was like, let's talk about our issues. Okay, you have, like, abandonment issues and you feel guilty and, like, both your feelings are valid. Let's continue on with our lives and not discuss this again. And it was very strangely done. And it just didn't seem like it was naturally developed. It felt very much like some of the side characters got shortchanged, that, like, Ben was very well developed, their relationship with the boy was very well developed, and nothing else really was in terms of characters or relationships, and I miss that. Like, it didn't feel like a full cast of characters that I cared about. It felt like Ben and their boyfriend, and then a bunch of cardboard cutouts. And I think a big problem with this was when it came to Ben's parents, because Ben obviously has a very difficult relationship with their parents. They were kicked out of the house for being non-binary. That's absolutely traumatic. And Ben's parents do come up later in the book, and they show up again, and it creates more conflict. I don't want to spoil this, but at the same time, it's hard to discuss without spoiling it. But basically, Ben makes some very difficult decisions. Ben spends a lot of time, like, grappling with how they feel about their parents. Like, do they love them? Do they hate them? Do they still care about them? What do they think their parents feel for them? And it's a lot of, like, difficult pondering, which is very understandable because, like, your parents kicking you out of the house for being non-binary is so traumatic, I can't imagine. By the time they reached a decision, they reached a very clear-cut very black and white decision that felt way too easy for the situation at hand. And I've read quite a few books about toxic or abusive parents. I understand needing to like keep yourself away from unhealthy influences in your life and things like that, and that parents don't inherently belong in your life just because they're your parents. But the way it was handled in this book with Ben's unhealthy relationship with them, or I shouldn't say Ben's unhealthy relationship because that puts the blame on them, but more like their toxic influence over Ben. I understand that, but it just didn't feel like it was developed enough. It didn't feel like it was an actual decision that was being made. It felt very black and white in a situation where things shouldn't be black and white, even if you have to make a black or white answer. Even if you have to be like, yes, they'll be in my life because I still love them, or no, I'm kicking them out permanently, I'll never have anything to do with them again. Even if you have to make a black and white decision, it's not black and white reasoning. And it felt in this book like it was much too easy, much too simplistic for the situation that it was. Which is a very vague way of saying things, but I'm trying not to spoil the ending here, even if it's a contemporary. That wasn't really the point of the book. It was just kind of the build up, the romance, all that kind of things. It was just the relationships really let this down, and the side characters, and I didn't love them. But the non-binary rep in this book was great. Its own voices. I am cis, so I can't really comment on that at all. But just reading it, it was something I really enjoyed. I think because it's by a non-binary author, you get so many little things in this book that I think are overlooked when books like these aren't written by own voices authors. Like at one point, Ben is shopping for clothes with their sister, and their sister just automatically takes them over to the men's section, even though their sister is totally supportive, gets their pronouns right, respects their non-binary identity, respects the fact that they are non-binary. Their sister is, this lovely person. She still unconsciously just takes Ben over to the men's section, even though Ben is like looking at all these lovely floral, I don't know if they were dresses. I forget what it was, but it was something that was stereotypically feminine, that was like loose and flowy, and like oversized sweatshirts and like cute things like that are very stereotypically feminine in our society. And their sister was just like automatically like, okay, you're non-binary, here's the men's section. And I don't know, there were little things like that sprinkled through the book that I just think come from it being an own voices book. And I think it was just really well done, from my completely ignorant perspective. But I did really enjoy that. And overall, I would recommend this book. I think it was good, especially if you're someone who likes romance. I'm not sure if I would recommend it to people who don't like romance, because just as a hard-hitting contemporary, I think there were a lot of flaws. I think the writing style and the development of the relationships weren't necessarily fantastic, but I think the romance made up for that if you are someone who really enjoys romance. So again, would recommend. It wasn't my favorite book of all time. It was only 3 stars, but it was one of those 3 stars that I really enjoyed, and I thought it was really worthwhile. It just wasn't quite good enough to get to 4 stars. So definitely pick up if it sounds like something you might enjoy, because I think you probably would. Let me know down below if you've read I Wish You All the Best and what you thought of it if you have. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see y'all again soon.